So the COP conference in Glasgow coming up is a huge moment in the fight against climate change. These conferences don't come around super often, especially not ones of this nature. And I think the vast majority of the public, British and global, recognise that climate is a global challenge and it needs global solutions. So it's really important, these opportunities, to bring people together and not just the big usual players. What's interesting about something like COP26 is that it puts the smaller nations, those who are often actually the most affected by climate change, on a kind of even keel with the big players like the US and the EU and the UK. So I think at a time when the British public...
Is China going?
The representatives from China will be there, yeah, absolutely. I think we can get a bit hung up on whether or not the presidents or premiers are going. What's important is that the negotiators are there. They're who are actually involved in the discussions. And we're at a point now where the public have never been more concerned about climate change, right? There's kind of overwhelming levels of support for action from the UK. And there's also really a recognition that the UK, this is a place where we could step up and be a real leader. There's been a lot of talk from this government about wanting to be a global Britain and a global leader. Well, now's your chance. So put your money where your mouth is, quite literally, put your money where your mouth is. We've heard a lot of promises from this government on climate, not so much backed up by investment. But let's step up to the plate in terms of our domestic agenda, because that puts us in a hugely powerful position coming into these really important global negotiations. It's a global problem, needs a global solution, and that's what people are calling for in the UK and all around the world.
Miatta, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I agree. I think, we had some really stark warnings from a sort of panel of experts that said, look, people, you've got about a decade to take drastic action to mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. So this is a make or break moment because we have some commitments and then we now need to think how we deliver that. So what does that mean for domestic governments? What does that mean for the big question of how do we help the global south decarbonise, and how do you manage the cost of that? And then how do we get, polluting countries in the global north to step up and show leadership? I think the kids sum it up the best. This is our future. You're messing up, quite frankly, and you're playing with, and yet we are not seeing the sort of political leadership that we need to see to confront such a big challenge. I still think it's doable. I think it's massively doable, and I think if we get it right, there will be upsides in that transition. I think we can do it in a way where we can kind of mitigate the risk to people and their jobs. We can do it in a way where actually we are living kind of a cleaner, greener, life and living standards are better. But it doesn't happen by accident. It has to be deliberate, it has to be proactive, and that requires a level of leadership and a level of grip that sadly we're not seeing in this country, and unfortunately we're not seeing enough globally.
Well, I just want to take a quick second, because sometimes I think in the media we can just be guilty of thinking that everyone knows what everything is. So I just want to do a quick recap on what COP26 actually is, just in case you're not familiar with it. COP26 is the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference. The COP, the reason it's called COP, that stands for the Conference of the Parties. The reason it's got the 26 is because this year will be the 26th annual summit. Do you see what they did there? Hence the name, COP26. And the UK is president this year, so that means it takes place in Glasgow. So there you go. That's just a bit of a heads up in case you are not quite sure what it is. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, Amy was just saying about it's time for the government to put their money where their mouth is, but it's not the government putting the money where the mouth is. It's us putting our money where the government's mouth is, isn't it, as taxpayers?
Well, this is the thing that concerns me is, Amy says there's overwhelming support. And if you ask most people, I think most of us would say, well, I'd rather the planet didn't continue to warm and that we both mitigated as try and minimise the warming and also adapt to a world that is already warming. But I think not a lot of concern goes into, certainly not enough for me, into, well, but how will this affect the lives of most of us, both here and in developing countries? Because when you say to people, oh yes, would you like to mitigate global warming? Most people say, well, yes, of course. It's like, why wouldn't you? It's like saying, do you want to live in a house that's falling down, or do you want to fix the roof? Of course you don't want to live in a house that's falling down. But when you say to people, so would you like to give up eating meat? Would you like to pay higher gas bills or live in a colder house? Would you like to give up your car? Would you like to stop flying abroad? Most people say, no. No, these are things that my grandparents aspired for me to have, and in many cases our grandparents didn't have all these things. And why would I want a worse life? And why would I want my children to have a worse life?